The restaurant smelled of citrus and slow-roasted lamb, a warm, buttery wind of garlic and rosemary that moved between tables like soft ossip. Above the main room, the chandelier fussed with its own light, crystal teardrops throwing tiny islands of brightness across the linen. Anna Martinez navigated those islands with practiced humility. Tray balanced, pens behind her ear, a folded pad of checks that had once been a different life. Her hands moved with the memory of other work. Precise, efficient, fingers that had once written code and signed patent claims, now smoothing napkins and closing tabs. When she smiled for a table, it was the same small, exact gesture she used in presentations once upon a time, only now she gave it away for a tip and the polite distance of a server. If you're finding this story on a channel, stay until the end. There's a truth that changes everything. If you like these kinds of twists, subscribe and leave a comment about the moment that surprised you most. Mrs. Blackwood sat near the window with a winter coat pulled around her shoulders like an apology to the cold. Her hair was a soft silver halo. She read the menu with the attention of someone for whom the written word was an island. And when Anna leaned in, she folded one hand over the other and watched Anna's lips. Anna did not speak aloud. She signed. The motion of her fingers was careful, as if she were weaving invisible thread between them. The word for soup, the little flutter that meant allergic, the direct, practiced attention that said, "I see you." Marcus Blackwood watched from his side of the table, hands folded like a brief that did not yet need opening, his cufflinks catching a slant of the chandelier light and throwing it back like a question. He lived in glass towers and made decisions that reshaped other people's lives. But tonight, his curiosity was held small and particular. He had come with his mother for reasons that had nothing to do with his work. She liked the duck here, she liked the manager's jokes, she liked a place that smelled of good things and could be counted on. He had been following the arc of a deal for months, parsing documents for late-night meetings with his legal counsel. And yet, the thing that arrested him was the small, precise ballet between the waitress and the woman he loved. "It's rare," he said, when the moment dissolved and Anna had stepped away to the pass. His voice was low enough that the table beside them mistook it for private prayer. "People who know how to sign in Manhattan honestly amaze me." Mrs. Blackwood smiled and made a soft clapping motion with both hands, delighted at the loop of assessment. Her eyes, a little faded from time, connected with Anna's across the room. Anna, caught in the act of clearing crumbs, looked up, and the light found the fine scar on her knuckle, a pale fingerprint from a past that had left prints in harder places than skin. Marcus Blackwood watched from his side of the table, hands folded like a brief that did not yet need opening, his cufflinks catching a slant of the chandelier light and throwing it back like a question. He lived in glass towers and made decisions that reshaped other people's lives. But tonight, his curiosity was held small and particular. He had come with his mother for reasons that had nothing to do with his work. She liked the duck here, she liked the manager's jokes, she liked a place that smelled of good things and could be counted on. He had been following the arc of a deal for months, parsing documents for late-night meetings with his legal counsel. And yet, the thing that arrested him was the small, precise ballet between the waitress and the woman he loved. "It's rare," he said, when the moment dissolved and Anna had stepped away to the pass. His voice was low enough that the table beside them mistook it for private prayer. "People who know how to sign in Manhattan honestly amaze me." Mrs. Blackwood smiled and made a soft clapping motion with both hands, delighted at the loop of assessment. Her eyes, a little faded from time, connected with Anna's across the room. Anna, caught in the act of clearing crumbs, looked up, and the light found the fine scar on her knuckle, a pale fingerprint from a past that had left prints in harder places than skin. For Anna, the exchange was a small thing, a few bills folded into the book of tricks that paid her rent and kept her phone alive. For Marcus, it was the opening to a question he didn't know he had until he had to answer it. He paid the check and left his card under her change with the kind of casualness that hid motive. The card was heavy with his name and the kind of title that could buy silence or leverage publicity. Anna slid it into her apron pocket without reading it. She had learned to accept small kindnesses and set them aside like coins. That week, the city was loud in a way that matched the season. Construction trucks clanged like distant percussion, delivery bicycles threaded between limos, a news ticker somewhere announcing the latest corporate consolidation as though it were celestial weather. David Chen's face had become a fixture on one of those tickers, smart jawline, a smile that looked like it had been engineered in a brand workshop. Headlines called him visionary. Press photos showed him in conference rooms with windows that looked down on gray rivers and tiny islands of traffic. Anna avoided those images, not because she didn't remember them, she remembered everything, but because the memory hurt like a bruise that throbbed when touched. David had not always been a headline. He'd been at the edge of the life she'd built. Co-founder, sometimes the voice in meetings who promised introductions and glossier launches. They had loved in the blunt way of two people exhausted by making something out of nothing. Then the shape of nothing had shifted, and what Anna had thought of as shared, her algorithms, her drafts, her provisional patent filings, had been rebranded in public as David's initiative. The world had needed a face, and he provided one as easily as he breathed. The patents she had filed with hands that shook had been listed under his name in the corporate registry. Contracts had changed in the night. Anna had called lawyers and cried in the backs of cabs and watched as people she had trusted ran their fingers across the glass of their watches and decided the sensible thing was not to damage partnerships. By the time she left, the company had a different logo, and her role had been edited out of the story like a paragraph removed from a speech. On the night she noticed the card in her pocket, she held it like a foreign object. She thought of throwing it away, but hands have a way of remembering. Where it sits on the hip is how you learn to balance life. Instead, she kept working, sliding plates, learning to calculate tips and fractions, making exact small arithmetic of hours and rent. Back at her small Queens apartment, beneath a calendar that had once tracked market launches and now counted nothing but the days until her rent was due, Anna took the card out and studied the name again. Marcus Blackwood. The surname brushed something inside her, like a memory of marble steps, and for a moment she thought of the courtroom she had never had the chance to stand in. Curiosity, for Anna, had always been a tool. Cooled down and sharpened, it became method. She did not answer the card's implied invitation immediately. Instead, she did what she always did when a thing unsettled her. She cataloged. She had 3 patents in her name when she fled the company, or so she told herself aloud. She kept a photocopy of one in a shoebox that still smelled faintly of cedar. It was an old habit to keep physical things. The originals of much more, she suspected, lived in the ephemeral world of cloud storage and corporate servers, the places where documents could be amended, attributed, and erased with a legal smear and a press release. It took Marcus less than a week to find something that would not let go of him. He was supposed to be talking to underwriters that morning about a merger that made his firm wealthy by association. Instead, his curiosity led him to a public patent database, and then, sliding further into the rabbit hole, as men with his resources do, he ran a professional search for inventor histories. There was a line, small, procedural, almost unreadable if you didn't know what to look for, that read, Inventor David Chen, under a patent that in his mind should have borne a different name. The patent in question had once been associated with Martinez Technologies in older press releases. That was when he saw the archived PDF, a press kit from 5 years prior, where the founder spotlight was a different photograph and different byline. In the margin of that archived document was a notation, submitted by Anna at Martinez Tech. It was a scrap of breadcrumb, nothing official, but for Marcus, the breadcrumb smelled like smoke. He made a call to an old friend in forensic diligence and asked for a quick metadata pull. Just run headers, timestamps, any device IDs, he said. The friend hesitated. Marcus had a reputation for taking risks, but he knew Marcus's sense of justice, which sometimes worked like an appetite. Within 48 hours, the friend sent back more than Marcus had asked for. A chain of custody, an email header showing a draft authored by anna.martinez@columbia.edu with an attachment timestamped 2 days prior to the filing. There was a backup on a private academic server that had salts and keys pointing to a personal device, a laptop whose host name pulled up a name Marcus recognized from an alumni directory, A. Martinez, Columbia. The more he looked, the thinner the seam between public claim and private creation became. Someone had moved the public attribution. Anna, meanwhile, had no idea that a man had traced the shape of her life with the same patience she'd used to debug a stubborn piece of software. She had learned how to live half-hidden, which taught her small, exact rules for survival. Do not tell your neighbors about the past. Do not let your landlord know you sometimes skip the heat. Keep the shoebox of documents under the mattress, and never, ever connect the laptop that had belonged to Martinez Technologies to the restaurant's Wi-Fi. She had routines that read like shame sequenced into habit. Yet even in habit, there were small resistances. She had kept a printed draft of one patent claim folded between pages of a tattered cookbook. The lemon-scented spine of that book had a salt stamp of memory. When Mrs. Blackwood asked about the soup and signed with her fingers, Anna answered with hands. Was it any wonder that the gesture left them closer than words sometimes could? The first time Marcus tried to speak to her outside the rhythm of the restaurant, he miscalculated and nearly bought her privacy. He came in on a Wednesday that smelled of rain, steam that rose off the sidewalk and clung to the restaurant's window like a promise, and sat with his mother who ordered oysters tenderly like someone protecting fragile things. When the table across the room erupted in laughter, Anna moved through the flurry with the exactness of choreography, and when she put the dish down at their table, she hesitated just long enough to let his eyes measure her face. "You've seen us before," he said, not asking so much as offering the obvious. There was a soft impatience in him, the kind that is practiced when someone wants to get on with things that matter. He watched her, not with desire at first, but with a curiosity that might become something else if she allowed. Mrs. Blackwood loves the lamb. Anna blinked, surprised to have been discussed. The apron at her waist felt like a uniform and a shield. "She told me the sauce has rosemary," she said, and signed the word for sauce because Mrs. Blackwood's eyes watched. She had the shape of someone used to being unseen. Her voice worked on the assumption that any attention would be brief and vanish like steam into the night. Marcus left that evening with a tip he thought adequate and a small smile that felt like a truce. He did not give her his card again. Instead, he left through the shadow of the doorway and told his assistant to set up a meeting with a diligence firm. He could sense, without wanting to yet name it aloud, that if the filings were wrong, the deal he was shepherding might collapse in a public way. It would cost his firm capital, it would cost his face, it would cost relationships he had spent years cultivating. Marcus had learned to weigh those things against his own conscience, and, increasingly, found the scale tipping in favor of integrity. Word arrived in the form of a press release. Pinnacle was pursuing an acquisition, a consolidation that would make headlines and create a new portfolio flagship. David Chen's photograph was at the top of the press kit, his smile razor-sharp against a background of glossy graphs. Marcus's due diligence team forwarded the packet with a note. "There's a discrepancy. See inventor listing." Beneath that terse annotation was the seed of what would become trouble. Marcus printed the materials and placed them in a pile on his desk like evidence. For a man who measured life in spreadsheets, seeing a public record and an archived private file that did not match felt like smelling smoke in a building that insisted it had no fire. For Anna, the week dissolved into the smaller, unavoidable tasks of surviving cold mornings. She cleaned plates, packed leftovers for herself, and at night she opened her notebook to sketch product ideas she did not feel authorized to reclaim. Her hands, remember, hands were the motif of her life, traced the design of an interface in the margins. She could imagine a world in which she applied for new patents, where her name shone on a header like an author's credit. The thought of starting Perez Technologies or some new derivative felt like arrogance. Yet the sketches were there, precise boxes for inputs, elegant flows that only someone who had spent nights with code could imagine. She kept them hidden because hope in the wrong hands reads like provocation. The restaurant prepared for Christmas with the kind of fuss the city reserves for theater. Men ordered lobster and awkward proposals. Couples wrapped gifts beneath coats and spoke in the language of promises. On a Friday close to the holiday, the man arrived who would give Anna the opportunity to do something violent with a small kindness. He was not handsome in a refined way. He had the look of someone who had once been handsome and then been left to rot in the corners where ambition dries into cynicism. He had the sort of eyes that catalogued people for the pleasure of picking the softest ones. He sat at the bar and watched Anna the way a person watches a clock, with the sense that time will be useful if only applied ruthlessly. He finished his drink and left the thickness of his coat on the chair like an accusation. Later, when Anna cleared the last bread plate from his table, folded the linen and wrapped his change, he came back and dropped a crumbled envelope onto the counter. The paper sound was the sound of a hand closing on a life. Inside the envelope were crisp bills and a slip of paper. $1,000 cash. The instruction was cleaner than the currency. "Stand on the corner at 8 on Christmas Eve," it read in blocky print. "Let him, someone, expose you. Do something to humiliate yourself. We'll film it. Keep it short. You'll be paid when it's done." Anna's first thought was how small the amount felt relative to what had been taken from her. $1,000 was not trivial. It was a month's rent if she stretched. It was also the kind of sum that smelled like moral compromise when placed in your palm on a cold night. Her other thought, quicker, was of the hands that had once written clauses that mattered. Did she accept because she needed money, or because she was being given the chance to be seen in the exact way she had been erased? The logic twisted. A staged humiliation could become something else. Evidence in the wrong hands. A clip that would confirm someone's narrative that she was unstable. She folded the paper and tucked it into her apron, heart beating hard enough to bruise the quiet. "You're keeping something," Sarah, the head waitress, said later when they took the brown boxes to the back. Sarah had the bluntness of someone whose life had been run through 10-hour shifts and midnight cigarettes. She had been the first person at the restaurant to ask Anna how she ended up in service. Anna had given her the same answer she'd given everyone. Escaped a bad partnership, needed a job, had to rebuild. Sarah's eyes were kind but tired. "If it's cash," she added, and everyone laughed except Anna, who did not think the joke found its teeth. That night, at the other end of the city, David Chen watched the news cycle with the confidence of a man who had practiced nonchalance. He had counseled his team to watch reactions like a sculptor studies clay. Soften where necessary, harden where required. He did not know yet about the envelope that had changed hands at the restaurant, but he had spent years learning how to direct a story toward the shape he wanted. He built narratives around strategic omissions and carefully authored attributions. For him, a little public humiliation of someone who would not be believed anyway might be not a risk, but an investment, an example to others who might think of challenging him. Marcus felt the pressure of the holiday deal like a tightening band. He could have walked away. He could have shrugged and taken his firm's fee and let the press speak of David's mastery. Instead, he arranged for a discreet forensic pull. More than headers, he wanted device logs, cloud snapshots, a chain of backups that could not be chewed up by PR teams and spat out as noise. When the report came back, it provided what his instinct had told him to expect. A copy of a working document, complete with an author field fixated on Anna Martinez, located on an academic server and backed up to a personal device whose name matched the A. Martinez host name. There were also email trail discrepancies. An internal thread that had been redacted in the corporate archive but existed, unredacted, in a governmental public records dump. Someone had edited the public pieces to emphasize a tidy narrative. David as visionary, Anna as background. Someone had replaced headers. Marcus sat with the findings at his kitchen table and thought of Mrs. Blackwood's hands clasped in the light. He felt a low-grade anger that was personal and ethical at once. He closed his laptop and called a lawyer he trusted. Charles Morrison answered on the second ring. There was a timbre of sleep in his voice that suggested he had been up late reading cases. Marcus did not bother with pleasantries. "Run this, fast. I want someone who understands patent law and can read metadata without blinking. And check PR risk. We'll need to be surgical." Charles's voice took on the efficiency of someone who had read too many angry headlines. "You know this could cost you the deal," he said. "Make sure that's a price you are willing to pay." Marcus thought of the scales of reputation and conscience again and felt them tip the other way. Back at the restaurant, Anna counted her tips and rolled them into a rubber band. She thought of the envelope and how quickly decision felt like a Rubicon. The cash was enough to fix the boiler for a month or to buy passage to a technology conference where people still used patent filings like currency. She thought about the humiliated clip, the way it could be used by David to turn the narrative into a morality play. She thought about the way she had been edited out of her own life. Her hands closed around the rubber band and squeezed until her knuckles whitened. On the corner where the streetlight hung like a lantern over a scene, someone else watched the restaurant with a patience that had the assessed quality of a stakeout. He saw a woman go home with pockets that could hold both cash and ruin. He saw, too, the small light under their apartment window like a stage. Marcus had made a choice in that moment. He would see the story through, not because it was his story, but because he now understood what the absence of truth did to a person. Christmas approached with the slow, implacable hush of a city that had rehearsed warmth and then added a soundtrack. The air was cold enough to make breath visible, and Manhattan dressed itself in its sharpest glass, the kind that could reflect you perfectly or break you into 100 small lives. Anna felt the season as an ache. She had been given an offer to perform her own erasure on film. She had the envelope folded and tucked beneath her register like a decision waiting to be made. When she finally opened the envelope in the light of her small kitchen, she did not find a note of instruction, but a small hand-lettered card that said simply, "If you choose to play along, play it your way." There was no signature. The bread scent from the bakery downstairs invaded the room, and for a moment she heard Mrs. Blackwood's hands clapping, the way someone applauds a modest hero. Anna smiled without knowing why, and made a plan that had nothing to do with humiliation and everything to do with what a person could do when handed a stage. She would not allow herself to be a pawn, not because she believed in justice as some abstract. She believed in justice like a practical algorithm that could be debugged. She would take the envelope, the $1,000, and the script and invert them. If they wanted humiliation, she would give them a show that exposed the hands behind the curtain. She began to call old allies in small circles, names she had scrawled on napkins during her months of exile. Jennifer, who had once been an assistant at Martinez Technologies and who knew server names. A friend at Columbia who kept snapshots of lab servers. A freelance journalist who loved to scrape the holes in public narratives. In the city of glass, the pattern of light and shadow began to rearrange. Someone had offered Anna money to humiliate herself. She would use the same currency to buy a mirror that would not lie. The move was small: arrange the humiliation, plant a second camera, secure live metadata feeds, and yet it was audacious. It required a faith in procedural detail that she possessed like a tool belt. She made a list in her head the way she had once written an architecture. One camera in the bar, a second discrete device keyed to the venue's Wi-Fi to capture any uploaded footage, a backup server with a time-stamped snapshot under a pseudonym, an emailed draft to a journalist containing metadata and device IDs in case the footage was deleted. Her plan did not rely on hope alone. It relied on the fact that metadata does not lie if you can find it and hold it to the light. On Christmas Eve, the restaurant filled with people who loved the idea of merriment and the possibility of performance. The man who had left the envelope sat at the bar with a crew of cameras tucked into his jacket like small malevolent birds. David's operatives, because of course he had operatives, had not yet figured that Anna was preparing a counter. They were content in the belief that she was small enough to be moved by money and spectacle. They had never learned to read hands the way she did. When Anna took her place at the corner table and allowed the scene to begin, she did so with an awareness that was almost scholarly. Her eyes tracked the lighting. Her hands, which had once penned claims and then plates, moved through the motions of servitude even as they held a private script. The man would ask for something ridiculous. There would be laughter. A camera would capture the laugh and the reaction. But Anna's final move would be a different thing entirely. She had chosen, cleverly and with a cruelty she owed to the past, to make the humiliation into a reveal. Marcus, who had been watching from the glass of his office across town and had chosen to resist the easy path of withdrawal, sat with Charles on speakerphone. "If this goes wrong for her," he said, "we pull everything and go loud." The plan had to be surgical. He had not met Anna outside the restaurant in more than polite exchanges, but he felt a rising respect that risked becoming something else. He put his palm to the glass and watched the restaurant sparkle like a piece of polished obsidian. None of them, not David's men nor the casual patrons, knew that another set of hands, Anna's, was arranging the stage. When the moment came, she invited humiliation to be the format and used it as the cover to pull the thread that would undo a tapestry. The way she did it required patience, the kind of thinking that has been honed by nights spent debugging lines of code and days spent learning to measure the truth by physical evidence. It required that someone remember to record the back door, preserve the chain of custody, and email the journalist a torrent of proof with an alphanumeric signature. She smiled when she stepped into the light. Her hands moved in a way that would be photographed and misread. She let the first camera find what it expected, a woman performing foolishness. But in her pocket, among the cash and the folded envelope, her thumb brushed the smooth edge of a USB drive with red tape. It felt like a weapon that could not be seen until used. The red tape was not for show. It was the flash of a person who had been erased and had found a way to write herself back into a file. She would not let the $1,000 be the sum of her dignity. She would make it the cost of exposing the man who had built a life on her omissions. Outside, the lights of the skyscrapers burned through the night like distant stars. Inside, the chandelier frowned down on the small theater. $1,000 had been dangled. The man in the jacket smirked with the boredom of the privileged. He thought the show would end with a clip and a gossip feed. No one at the bar knew the orchestra of evidence Anna had smuggled into a pocket. A backup server pinging at regular intervals, a journalist on an encrypted line, a forensic snapshot saved to a cloud under a pseudonym. She had learned that the only way to take on a man who rewrote histories was to make sure a history was kept that he could not alter. When the camera rolled and the laughter began, something in the room changed. The first cut looked like what the man had paid for, spectacle. The second cut, one the man did not expect, showed the timing and the threads he had pulled behind the scenes. In a few deft motions, Anna turned the scene. Instead of simply performing, she reclaimed. She allowed the man to coax her into a line that she had prepared. Then, with a voice laced with a technique that could only belong to someone who had once been precise with language and law, she read a paragraph of a patent claim aloud as though it were a confession. It was absurd. It was theatrical. The laughter curdled because the words she spoke carried metadata. The file name, the host name, the precise hash of a document that existed on a server and had mapped to the device he had assumed never existed. The words carried the steel of evidence. The man in the jacket realized too late that he had not bought humiliation. He had triggered a reveal. People in the room shifted. A camera operator cursed and leaned forward to catch a better angle. The bar's Wi-Fi, the place they had chosen to stream for convenience, registered a ping to an IP traced to a backup server in Queens with a timestamp. The journalist's email went out in the moment between a laugh and an intake of breath. On Marcus's phone, a notification blurred the perimeter of a headline. Unscripted clip reveals chain of evidence against David Chen. His hand tightened around the device. Anna stepped back from the table where the man pretended no involvement and watched as the sound in the room became a different sort of noise, one that included police radios in the distance and the soft murmur of staff trying to understand what had just happened. She felt the strange lightness of a person who had finally used the instruments at her disposal. Her hands were not trembling, they were steady, like a surgeon's. In her mind, the shoebox under the mattress sat like a relic finally acknowledged. Across town, David Chen was on a stage, introducing the merger in a glossy video feed. His team would be the next to know, the ones who would taste the first metallic hint of panic. He did not yet know enough to sweat, but the city's rumor mill favored speed over patience. The clip, the email, the metadata traces, they traveled faster than a man who had built his empire on meticulous erasure. In the restaurant, Mrs. Blackwood's hands found Anna's wrist and squeezed once. The motion was private and strong. Outside the window, the city did what cities do. When a big thing happens, it blinked and then focused. Anna folded her hands, those same hands that had once been accused of being invisible, and let the current of the moment carry her. She had been offered $1,000 to humiliate herself and had turned it into a lever. She did not yet know the cost. She only knew the mechanics. Evidence is evidence, and if you can anchor it to a time and a device and a human chain, it can hold the weight of accountability. She had given the city a track it could follow. She had also given herself something she had not allowed in years, a choice. Marcus stood in his glass office and watched the notifications bloom. He felt the old pang of consequence and the new bloom of possibility. He sent a concise message to Charles. Prepare to go public. We have a responsibility to follow the chain. Charles replied with an assurance that sounded like a prayer. Snow began to fall outside, as if to bless the moment, or at least make it picturesque. Anna watched the flakes from the doorway of the back corridor and thought of the shoebox and of the red-taped USB. She thought of the $1,000 now folded under the bills in her register, money that had bought her a stage she had not asked for, and a weapon she had crafted. Some men buy spectacle to shore up stories. Some women, when given spectacle, turn it into a confession that shames the confessor. The night was not over. A storm of legal actions and press releases would follow. Courtrooms would chew up PR talking points and spit out outcomes that took time. But on that corner, with the chandelier beating down like a watchful judge, Anna felt for the first time that the sequence might bend toward justice. She would not be rescued. She would be present. The first real move had been hers. The second would be the law's, and the third would be the kind of life you build when you take back what was always yours. The clip traveled like a spark. In minutes, it had been sent to an inbox belonging to a journalist Anna had fed a breadcrumb to weeks before. In an hour, it was being discussed in trading rooms and law firms. David's PR team scrambled to paint the footage as too clever satire. But the metadata, patient, stubborn, unromantic, kept surfacing like a witness who won't take the stand and then suddenly speaks. The timestamp of the document Anna had read matched the hash attached to the backup server. The device name traced to her old laptop. An email trail that some had thought scrubbed contained a draft with her name in the author field. It was, in legal terms, the kind of small, detailed chain that prosecutors love because it is methodical and immune to spin. When Marcus finally met Anna outside the restaurant, the snow had settled into a soft insistence. He offered her a hand, literal, not the sort of symbolic gesture reporters use in headlines, and she hesitated only a second before taking it. Their palms met, warm, surprisingly dry, familiar with tasks. She was not someone to be rescued. He did not offer rescue. He offered partnership. A lawyer he could trust, resources for forensic help, an ability to go public with the right people at the right time. She looked at him and read the kind of honesty you can only find in someone who has weighed cost and not bulk. "You're not the only one who's been rewritten," he said simply, and the line was true and small. Anna's decision to collaborate with Marcus was not an abdication of agency. It was a strategic alliance, one that would require her to continue making choices, to expose herself to the glare of public attention and the presence of a man who carried power she would have to be willing to accept. There would be risks. David's retaliatory moves would be careful and cruel, and the law would not move in the way of cinematic justice. It would move in slow, precise thuds that required patience. But for the first time in years, Anna felt the architecture of her life could be rebuilt. She had set a trap with the $1,000 and turned humiliation into a net. The man who had intended to humiliate her had only built the stage for his own undoing. Outside, the city continued its nocturne, unaware that the first crack in a carefully polished facade had already been struck. There were months ahead. Investigations, depositions, filings, the long grind of a court calendar. There would be threats and the whisper of careers in danger. But Anna closed her fingers around Marcus's palm and felt strength. She had given the show to those who thought she would play along, and in doing so, she had given herself back a narrative she knew how to write. The first move had been dramatic. The consequences were just beginning. The next moves would be the kind that demand time. Subpoenaed server logs, secured backups, a legal team that could parse timestamps forensically and argue the chain of custody in a courtroom. Anna would sit in deposition rooms and be asked to account for her work. She would answer with documentation and a calm that had been born of necessity. Marcus would stand beside her with a kind of integrity that did not try to eclipse her voice. And David, well, David would feel the pressure of a life built on edited truths cracking around its seams. For now, though, the city slept under a thin white blanket, and Anna, for the first time in years, tasted possibility that wasn't bitter. She folded the $1,000 into her wallet like a talisman and looked up at the glow of the chandelier. Her hands found Mrs. Blackwood's again and made a small gesture of thanks. The hands that had been offered money to humiliate her had been used instead to signal the opening of an audit. She would not allow herself to be the footnote. She would be the author of the rest of her story. The snow kept falling, and the lights of the towers burned like a promise of trials to come. But in the little warmth of the restaurant, by the sound of clinking plates and quiet conversation, Anna Martinez felt a kind of inevitable movement toward justice that was not a fairy tale, but was perhaps enough. Outside, in his penthouse, David Chen watched a different screen and felt a prickle of awareness when the clip hit his phone. He scrolled. The first emotion he allowed himself was annoyance, then a cold recognition of a problem requiring surgery. He did not yet see the whole of what had been set in motion. In a voice as smooth as a scalpel, he ordered a team to find the source of the leak. He framed it as containment. He did not realize that he was a patient in a case that had already been opened. Anna, who had been taught to hide in plain sight, stepped out into the night feeling the weight of 1,000 small decisions lining up like dominoes. She had been offered money to humiliate herself and had turned the offer into a lever that would pry open a closed door. The sound of footsteps in the snow faded behind her, and a clock began to count the true measure of consequence. Weeks and months filled with subpoenas, headline cycles, and the slow work of courts. The first move had been hers. The rest would have to be earned. She did not yet know if it would be easy. She began to walk, hands in her pockets, the shoebox at home waiting like a secret. She had lit a match in the dark. Now she would watch what flame revealed. The shoebox on Anna's kitchen table smelled faintly of old paper and thrift store cardboard. She set her bag down, peeled off her coat, and sat. For a long moment, she simply looked at the stack of items she had assembled with the exactness of someone making a grave. There were screenshots, cropped but time-stamped, printouts of the original footage, newspaper clippings, the tiny flash drive she had begged a sympathetic camera assistant to copy before the upload disappeared. There was the envelope with the $1,000 bill, folded twice, the edges already soft from being held like a prayer. She spread everything out as if the light through her window could turn them into witnesses. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. She let it go to voicemail and listened later, because she wanted the quiet of the room to be the first audience. When she did listen, his voice was the ready, practical thing it had been from the start. No grand speeches, just logistical confirmations. The council had drawn up declarations. They had set an appointment with a forensic analyst for Saturday, and Nina, his paralegal, had arranged to file the request for expedited discovery. "We'll move fast, Anna," he said. "Slow is fine, but controlled." His tone sent a small, clean lucidity through her chest. She called back. They spoke about evidence transfer, about how to duplicate the drive and how to record chain of custody. Marcus wanted every move cataloged. Anna wanted the confidence of knowing that what she had was not vulnerable to the spin doctors and smear machines David would inevitably unleash. They agreed she would hand the original items to his office and keep copies with a notarized timestamp. It was a bureaucratic intimacy, names, addresses, times, arranged to protect the truth. The first official letters arrived within a week. Subpoenas, civil filings, a demand from David's counsel to preserve all materials. The legal machinery hummed into being on both sides. The paper was cold and precise, and paradoxically reassuring. Each stamp and signature was a rung on a ladder that Anna might climb. Depositions felt like an enactment of the world's small cruelties. Chairs too upright, fluorescent light that made every face look paler and harder. Opposing counsel was a man whose smile had been practiced for courtroom use. He asked simple questions in a tone of harmless curiosity that was mechanical malice. "You understand the consequences of a false statement, Miss Martinez?" he said. "You know what perjury entails?" he said. Yes, and the oath she took lodged like a small talisman of focus. She answered each question with the paperwork arranged before her. Dates, emails, the chain of edits, the backup logs from the third-party server that showed an alteration window inconsistent with any benign production process. When asked about her motives, she told the truth. She had been humiliated, she had been offered money, she had refused. She had kept copies because she feared someone would try to erase what had happened. Her voice sometimes betrayed a roughness that ink and timestamps could not. Once she had to pause and breathe until a small evenness returned. Marcus sat a few seats away with his hands folded, a quiet presence that did not speak for her but did not let her stand alone. David's campaign countered as predicted. A public statement about creative liberties and product integrity hit the press within 24 hours. Anonymous social media posts alleged that Anna was a disgruntled former contractor with an axe to grind. Old acquaintances were dug up and asked to confirm minor quibbles that could be spun into character flaws. It was meticulous and cruel, an attempt to make her a problem rather than a plaintiff. Anna watched from her apartment while the news cycle performed itself, a dizzy carousel of commentary and insinuation. She learned quickly what it meant to be the subject and the object of a manufactured narrative. There were other threats, too, thinly veiled, sometimes delivered with the courtesy of legal letters, sometimes anonymous and raw. Once, a plain envelope slid under her door containing a single Polaroid, a photo of the restaurant window where she had been with Mrs. Blackwood, taken that evening. That night, she slept poorly. Marcus arranged for Reyes, his investigator, to meet her the following morning. Reyes was a man who smelled faintly of old tobacco and careful habits. He put a small list of practical safeguards on a napkin and then, without theatricality, hired a locksmith to change the locks on her building entry. "Not forever," he said, "just until the temperature drops." The forensic lab's results arrived and were quietly dramatic. The analyst, a woman with surgical patience, laid out a timeline of file access and edits. The original clip had been uploaded from an account linked through a server that showed a pattern of access consistent with deliberate tampering. Timestamps smudged in a way that suggested manual alteration. The analyst could not by herself assert motive. She could not name David as the manipulator. But the technical details formed a map that pointed away from a simple accidental error and toward coordinated interference. Marcus sat across from Anna when she read the report. He did not make promises he could not keep. Instead, he outlined the legal motion that could force a production of raw footage and internal logs from David's team. "What about publicity?" Anna asked at one point, the hunger in her voice sharp. "If we go public now, we control the narrative before they can." "Publicity is a double-edged sword," Marcus replied. "We don't want to hand them the stage to deflect. We'll use it when it's decisive. For now, we make the paper trail impossible to deny." His fingers tapped on the table with a slow, measured rhythm. She liked the sound. It had a promise of endurance. The first hearing was a morning of formalities and small triumphs. An order for limited discovery, permission to depose a key production editor, a preliminary injunction preventing the destruction or alteration of relevant material. Simple words, grant, deny, order, that snapped into force like law made of muscle. The judge, a woman whose face was patient and her voice neutral, asked a single question about the chain of custody, and Anna felt, in that moment, all the hours that had gone into copying, notarizing, photocopying, sealing, and filing coalesce into an answer that could stand before an indifferent bench. David's reaction was surgical. He hired a new publicist who polished a counter-narrative. The footage had been part of an experimental sequence, the edits legitimate for artistic reasons. Behind that, a different kind of assault began. Corporate lawyers issuing nuisance motions, delays presented as due process, requests for more time framed as haste's enemy. Anna grew accustomed to the rhythm: push, counterpush, file, respond. It was exhausting in the way of prolonged, focused work. She found her days becoming a series of small administrative victories. In the hush between hearings, there were moments of ordinary life pushed into the margins. She met Mrs. Blackwood for coffee, and they sat and spoke of wintering, of old houses and how they needed constant care. "You'll see it through," Mrs. Blackwood said, stirring her tea. "You already have." The confidence of someone whose own days had been long and steady. Anna felt those words like a hand on her shoulder. At night, she would sometimes go to the window and watch the city under its sodium lights, the steady stream of cars, the people stitched into their routes. Snow came again, tentative at first, then with a proper insistence that left the streets quieter, the world softer. She found that silence both restorative and strange. Her phone would still buzz. Messages from Marcus, updates from Nina, new filings. But the night made them distant. Once, alone, she opened the $1,000 envelope and smoothed the bill between her fingers. It was only paper. It had only been intended to degrade her. She felt instead the absurdity of how currency could be repurposed. She thought of the little leverage she had turned it into and smiled, a small private acknowledgement of how stubborn agency could be. One afternoon, during a temporary lull, Marcus invited her to a small meeting with a reporter from the Ledger. The kind of investigative piece that was patient, that looked into the underlying structures rather than the spectacle. He believed a carefully judged leak to responsible press could balance the scales, presenting the forensic findings in a way the public could understand without offering David the raw materials for counterattack. The reporter asked questions that Anna had rehearsed and some she had not. She heard herself speak of boundary and consent, of the small humiliations that compound, of the courage of ordinary people when they refuse to be small. When the conversation ended, the reporter touched her arm and said, "We'll hold until you're ready." Holding, Anna understood, would become a skill. So would waiting. The weeks folded into depositions and hearings, into the slow accumulation of facts. There were fleeting victories, a file produced late with missing metadata that the court ordered preserved, an internal email that implied awareness of the edits. There were setbacks, too. A witness who claimed not to recall, a storage device that had been wiped according to a technician who used the language of inevitability. Each time, Marcus and his team parsed the loss and found, somewhere beneath it, a thread that might yet be followed. When spring began to lean toward early thaw, a judge granted the motion to compel production of unredacted backups from the server hosting the original clips. The order was technical and precise, and in the quiet of Marcus's office that day, Anna felt its significance like a held breath released. Reyes had managed to find a log from a mirror server that had been overlooked, a fragment that, when combined with the analyst's timeline, drew a straight line across the chaos David had tried to make of things. It was not total victory, but it was a path. David, sensing pressure, moved with a different kind of violence. He filed a defamation claim against the Ledger, an attempt to silence the press through litigation's cost. He launched a countersuit that named Anna and Marcus in the same paragraph, the implication that their motives had been collusion. The machinery he had at his disposal was vast and armored. Anna did not shrink. What she had learned in the months of subpoenas and forensics and sleep-starved mornings was not just how to survive an assault, it was how to turn process into protection. On the morning the mirror server logs were accepted into evidence, Anna sat alone in her kitchen holding a paper cup of coffee grown cold. Outside, a street cleaner whispered along the curb. Her phone rang. Nina. "We did it," Nina said. The relief that rushed through Anna was hot and immediate, unsentimental. It was not triumph so much as the quietly ecstatic recognition that the work had been right. She pictured the 100 small, exact motions, copy this, notarize that, ask a favor, that had led to this moment. She thought of David in his penthouse, of the calls he was making, the counsel he was instructing. She did not imagine his ruin. She imagined the brittle calculus he would now have to do. He had spent a long time assuming anonymity could be purchased, that editing could substitute for accountability. The law, she had discovered, was not justice personified. It was an instrument that, if used patiently and precisely, could make a public thing of private wrong. That evening, she walked again through the neighborhood, the air bright and sharp. She was tired in a manner that felt earned. She held the shoebox close to her chest until she reached Mrs. Blackwood's building and left it on the stoop, with a note, "Moved to safe custody. Thank you." When she turned away, the snowfall had stopped. The street lamps cast their ordinary halos. Ahead, the court calendar waited. The next hearing would test the evidence in a more public forum. There would be insistence, counter-argument, perhaps prolonged erosion into appeals. Anna did not imagine a clean ending. She knew now that the hardest victories were those that made room for life to be rebuilt, slow, honest, with new blueprints. She allowed herself, for a moment, to feel the possibility of ordinary things. An evening without calls, the sound of her sister's laughter on the phone, a season of work not defined by fighting a single man's lies. She had lit a match in the dark. It had set a careful, stubborn flame. Now she would watch what it revealed, and if necessary, tend it until the light was enough.